Putin does not want a ceasefire and prefers a comprehensive agreement to end the war. This was reported by the American outlet Axios, citing their source. During the conversation, Trump said, and I quote, "I think a quick peace deal is better than a ceasefire." Today, Donald Trump called the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. The conversation was initially one-on-one, and then European leaders joined in. Trump invited Zelensky to Washington. According to preliminary information, the meeting could take place as early as Monday. Zelensky said that during the call, they discussed positive signals from the American side regarding participation in guaranteeing security for Ukraine. According to him, it is important that for reliable security guarantees, Europeans are involved together with the U.S. at every stage. Meanwhile, the Council of the European Union is convening an emergency meeting of EU country ambassadors in Brussels following the meeting between Trump and Putin. The historic night, which drew the world's attention, passed without any agreements on Ukraine and without new sanctions for Russia. The Trump-Putin meeting went off script right from the start and ended much sooner than planned, and the scheduled formal lunch was canceled. The negotiations lasted about 3 hours. The press briefing lasted 15 minutes. No time was allotted for questions from the press, even though they were quite pointed, like, "When we stop killing innocent Ukrainians?" But these questions went unanswered. Putin pretended not to hear the questions, or acted as if he didn't understand English. What Trump was saying to him at that moment is unknown. Despite the lack of any noticeable achievements at the meeting, the American president assured in an interview with the American channel Fox News that the talks went 10 out of 10. Let's recall how it all happened. Ol Koshelenko, our special correspondent in the USA, broke down the entire meeting minute by minute.
A perfectly staged show at the Elmendorf-Richardson Military Base Airport began with great pomp. The plane carrying the President of the United States arrived first, but Trump stayed on board for a while to synchronize his exit with Putin. They descended the stairs at the same time, greeted each other with broad smiles, and, after shaking hands, walked together down the red carpet to the photo podium. The TV broadcast was enhanced by 4 F-22 fighter jets on either side, while B-2 bombers flew overhead. The presidents either didn't hear or pretended not to hear the questions shouted by American journalists. "Mr. Putin, did you underestimate Ukraine? President Putin, will you stop killing civilians?" And even though Putin's Urus limousine was waiting for him at the airfield, Trump offered him a ride. Together, sitting in the back seat of the Beast, that's what they called a U.S. president's limousine, smiling and chatting, the presidents headed off to the 3-on-3 negotiations. On the American side, in the room besides the president, were Secretary of State Rubio and Special Representative Vitkov. On the Russian side, there were Foreign Minister Lavrov and Putin's aide Ushakov. The same scene repeated itself. Although journalists from free countries desperately shouted their questions, Trump and Putin silently posed for photos and videos. Then, for almost 3 hours behind closed doors, while correspondents were invited early into the press conference hall, where 2 podiums had been prepared for the president's speeches, it then became clear that the meeting agenda had been shortened. The lunch and expanded format negotiations would not take place. But there was still hope to hear answers to questions at the press conference. However, it turned out to be the biggest disappointment. The presidents limited themselves to brief statements, non-confrontational, but also lacking any real results. Trump stated that some progress had been made. Putin said he was committed to ending the war, but, I quote, "after the root causes of the conflict are addressed." The situation with the questions was the same. Journalists shouted out, but the presidents ignored all attempts.
I have said more than once, and I repeat, that for Russia, the events in Ukraine are linked to fundamental threats to our national security. Moreover, we have always considered, and still consider, the Ukrainian people, and I have said this many times, to be a brotherly nation. No matter how strange it may seem, under the current circumstances, we share common roots, and everything that is happening is a tragedy and a great pain for us. That is why our country is genuinely interested in putting an end to this. But at the same time, we are convinced that in order for the Ukrainian settlement to be stable and long-lasting, it is necessary to eliminate all the root causes of the crisis, which have been mentioned repeatedly, to take into account all of Russia's legitimate interests, and to restore a fair balance in the sphere of security in Europe and throughout the world. I agree with President Trump. He mentioned this today, that, of course, Ukraine's security must also be guaranteed.
I believe we had a very productive meeting. There were many points on which we reached agreement. Most of them, in fact. There are a few key issues on which we have not yet reached a final agreement, but there has been some progress. So there is no agreement yet. There is still no final agreement. I will call NATO soon. I'll reach out to a few people I consider necessary. And of course, I'll call President Zelensky to tell him about today's meeting. In the end, it all depends on them.
In conclusion, Trump announced the next meeting without giving any specifics, and Putin added, "Next time in Moscow." To which Trump replied that the idea sounded interesting. After that, both presidents hurried to the airfield. Their planes, with only a slight difference in departure times, each headed to their respective capitals. From Anchorage, Alaska, United States, Ol Koshelenko, Maxim Shinkarenko, TSN 1+1.
Meanwhile, the head of the United States advises Ukraine to make a deal with Russia and, for now, does not plan to impose sanctions against Moscow. After his meeting with Putin, Trump gave another interview to Fox News, where he revealed a bit more about the first meeting in years with the Kremlin leader. He rated the summit 10 out of 10. According to him, they supposedly got along very well with the Kremlin chief. That's why, in the near future, he won't be imposing sanctions as he had previously threatened. He said he would consider sanctions on buyers of Russian oil in 2 or 3 weeks. Trump did not want to admit on which issue he and Putin failed to reach an agreement. The meeting between Trump and Putin is being discussed on the front pages of global media, with a red carpet and warm words, but without any agreements. That's how the Washington Post describes the summit. After nearly 3 hours of negotiations, the American president and the Kremlin leader took the stage with nothing to say, Western journalists emphasize. Politico calls the meeting in Alaska a triumph for Putin. A war criminal was welcomed on American soil as a friend, not as the leader of a pariah state that invaded the territory of a sovereign country, the article states. Western media note that Putin left Anchorage without making any commitments to a ceasefire. And despite the warm welcome, Trump was unable to secure a ceasefire. At the same time, there is reportedly a preliminary agreement on a ceasefire in the air until the three-way meeting between Trump, Zelensky, and Putin. This was reported by The Economist journalist Oliver Carroll on social network X, citing his own sources. However, this information has already been denied by Volodymyr Zelensky's advisor, Dmytro Lytvyn. He commented under the journalist's post, saying that supposedly the Ukrainian side hasn't heard anything about this yet. He was grinding his teeth in frustration. Body language experts, including clinical and forensic psychologist from the U.S. Dr. John Paul Harrison, analyzed the meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. In his opinion, the U.S. president behaved quite differently than he did at meetings with other world leaders. He was rather warm and friendly, although he still tried to compete nonverbally with Putin for dominance. Specifically, they sat with their legs apart and their arms folded. At the same time, the expert noticed that it was difficult for the American president to listen to Putin until the end. And in the end, Trump couldn't completely hide his disappointment with the meeting.
Both were demonstrating a position of strength. It didn't look like a conflict, but each showed with their body, "I'm in charge here." In charge. That's where things got very interesting to me. Putin was simply reading a prepared speech without the kind of emotion you'd expect in such a situation. But Trump was different. From what I saw, he looked disappointed. He had less energy than usual. It seemed to me that he was upset. He was grinding his teeth. Sometimes he does that when he's angry or irritated. So, in my opinion, things didn't go the way he wanted, at least judging by his body language.
And what did you notice about Putin's behavior? What do you think? Will he dare to attend a trilateral meeting? Will he look the Ukrainian president in the eye? Write about it in the comments. And don't forget to like the video. It's really important to us. topic surrounding the meeting between Putin and Trump that was actively discussed on social media was the height of the Russian dictator. In all the videos, he doesn't appear much shorter than Trump. And let's note that Trump's official height is 190 centimeters, while Putin's is only 170. Although in many photos, Putin is even shorter than Medvedev, whose height is 163 centimeters. So those who watched the broadcast of the meeting speculated that Putin was given some kind of special device, like an exoskeleton under his pants from the knees down, so that he wouldn't look even less imposing next to Trump. This is also evidenced by the dictator's strange walk and his shifting from foot to foot during the meeting, which social media users noticed. Sometimes it might even seem like he's walking on tiptoes. It has long been known that at meetings with various politicians, Putin wears specially made platform shoes that add 10 to 12 centimeters to his height. During the so-called Trump summit with Mr. Pooh, the Russian dictator was handed a personal letter. According to Reuters sources, it was written at the White House by the First Lady of the United States, Melania Trump. She mentioned the abducted Ukrainian children there. Trump personally handed the Kremlin leader a letter from his wife during their talks. The detailed contents have not yet been disclosed. Notably, the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin precisely because of the illegal deportation of Ukrainian children.